She paid for seat 1A. She boarded quietly. She smiled. And then, everything changed. The senior flight attendant didn't see a calm, educated black woman. She saw a problem, a threat, someone who couldn't possibly belong in first class. And with just a few words, the humiliation began. But what no one on flight SV-815 knew was that the woman they were trying to silence. She helped write the very code of ethics this airline was built on. What happens when power underestimates quiet strength? What if a single act of bias becomes the spark that grounds an entire system? And who really owns the sky, the ones who shout, or the ones who stand firm in silence? This isn't just a story about a flight gone wrong. It's a story about dignity, about quiet resistance, about what happens when calm becomes a storm. You're about to witness the story of Dr. Amara Templeton, a black woman who refused to disappear and changed an industry without ever raising her voice. If this opening moved you, hit like, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin. The first thing Dr. Amara Templeton noticed as she stepped onto Sky Vista Flight SV-814 was the temperature, not of the air, but of the atmosphere. Chilly, controlled. First-class cabins were designed to feel like a sanctuary. Cream leather seats, gold-accented fixtures, a hint of bergamot in the air to signal premium care. But beneath all that luxury was something colder. Eyes, not everyone's, just a few. But Amara had spent a lifetime learning how to spot them. The glance too long, the up-down scan, the question that hadn't been spoken yet but was already fully formed. It came from a woman standing by the galley, adjusting a tray of stemless champagne glasses. Late 50s or early 60s. Stiff posture, frosted blonde bob, polished red nails, uniform crisp and ironed flat. Name tag Carolyn. Carolyn Drake, senior flight attendant. She glanced up, took in Amara's pressed navy travel suit, low-heeled flats, and small black leather tote bag. Her gaze lingered. Amara didn't flinch. She offered a gentle smile and continued forward. "Good evening," Amara said softly as she passed. Carolyn didn't respond. She simply watched, as if calculating something. Seat 1A, window. Amara placed her bag carefully beside her, slid in, and exhaled. She adjusted the hem of her pants slightly and stared out at the jet bridge. The plane wasn't full yet. Movement hummed around her. Business travelers in sleek backpacks, a couple speaking French, a mother calming a fussy toddler behind the curtain to economy. A young flight attendant stepped into the aisle beside her. Latino, maybe mid-20s, fresh-faced, anxious, but kind-eyed. He smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," he said. "Would you like a drink before takeoff? We have sparkling water, orange juice, or champagne." "Water is perfect," Amara replied. "No ice." He nodded. Right away, as he turned to go, Carolyn appeared beside him like a shadow. "Leo," she said with a pointed look, "please assist passengers in rows 3 and 4. I'll handle first row." He hesitated for a second, then nodded and disappeared behind the curtain. Carolyn turned to Amara. "Ma'am," she said, voice clipped but polite, "this is seat 1A. Amara tilted her head. "Yes, that's what my ticket says." Carolyn extended a hand. "May I see your boarding pass?" "Please." Amara reached calmly into her bag and retrieved the printed pass. She held it out. Carolyn didn't take it immediately. Instead, she glanced around to see who might be watching. Her voice rose slightly. "It's standard protocol," she said, "especially for international flights." Amara offered the smallest of nods. "I understand." Carolyn finally took the pass and examined it for a beat too long. Her lips pressed into a line. Then she read it aloud. Templeton. Amara. 1A. Her tone made the name sound like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. She handed the ticket back with a tight smile. Enjoy your flight. Amara accepted it and placed it back in her bag. Thank you. But Carolyn didn't move. She lingered just a moment longer than she needed to, scanning Amara's face again. Then, without another word, she walked away. The interaction had lasted no more than a minute, but the air had shifted. A man across the aisle, mid-40s, glasses, suit jacket folded neatly beside him, had clearly noticed. His brows drew together slightly, but he said nothing. He opened a worn leather notebook and jotted something quickly. Back in the galley, Leo Martinez rinsed his hands and tried to steady his breathing. Something about that exchange hadn't felt right. He'd seen Carolyn do that before. Question someone subtly. Call it procedure, but only with certain passengers. Still, she was his supervisor. He was new. He couldn't afford to cause trouble. Or could he up front? Amara Templeton smoothed her lapel, reached for her phone, and unlocked it. She hesitated. Her thumb hovered over a secure app, an interface hidden behind 3 layers of encryption. She didn't press it. Not yet. Instead, she locked the screen again and folded her hands in her lap. She had known this might happen. Not just tonight, not just this flight, but in general. In the air, in hotels, in boardrooms, in banks, in quiet corners where assumptions were formed in an instant. Sometimes it was a question about her seat. Sometimes it was a second glance at her ID. Sometimes it was a joke, phrased just vaguely enough to give the speaker an escape hatch. But tonight, something about Carolyn Drake's tone and the fact that she'd dismissed Leo so quickly felt like a storm cloud gathering. Carolyn wasn't just suspicious. She was waiting for something. Amara inhaled, held it, released it slowly. She wasn't here to pick a fight. She was here to watch, to observe, and, if needed, to act in silence. The captain's voice crackled overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Sky Vista Flight 815 with service from Chicago to Barcelona. We're just wrapping up boarding and expect to be underway shortly. Amara leaned her head back and closed her eyes. Just then, Leo returned with a fresh glass of water. He placed it on her tray with care. She opened her eyes and smiled softly. Thank you, she said. He nodded, glanced around, and leaned just slightly closer. I saw what she did, he whispered. Amara blinked. It's all right, she said. It wasn't your fault. He straightened. Then she added, but silence helps no one. Leo swallowed and nodded slowly. Then he turned and disappeared behind the curtain, across the aisle. Graham Tiller wrote something else in his notebook. The engines began their low rumble beneath the cabin, and somewhere deep inside, seat 1A, a current of something old and heavy began to stir. Not anger, not yet, but readiness. Something was coming, and Amara Templeton would be ready. Amara didn't sleep. She didn't even pretend to. The hum of the engines, the dimmed cabin lights, the subtle clicking of seatbelt signs, all of it faded beneath the low static in her mind. She had learned, over the years, to live in that static. It wasn't anxiety. Not exactly. It was more like listening for a sound she couldn't name, but would recognize the moment it arrived. Carolyn hadn't spoken to her again since the ticket check, but she'd walked by, twice, slowly, both times. Her eyes brushed over Amara's seat like she was memorizing the stitching. Amara stayed calm, still. Her phone rested face down on the tray table. Screen dark. Signals quiet. Leo passed by once more, checking in on other passengers. He didn't look at her, but his posture had changed. Stiffer, more careful. The kind of posture you get when you know something is wrong, but don't yet know what to do with it. In the row behind Amara, a couple argued softly in Spanish. A man on the aisle coughed and adjusted his seat. The world kept moving, until it didn't. Carolyn returned. This time, she held a small tablet in her hand. The cabin manifest. "Excuse me again," she said, louder now, projecting to the nearby seats. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm not seeing your name on the first-class manifest." Amara blinked. "Once." Slowly. "You've already checked my ticket," she said. "Yes, I understand," Carolyn replied, tightening her smile. "But I've refreshed the roster, and you're not listed. That raises a security concern." Graham Tiller, 2 rows back, lowered his notebook slightly. A man in 3A shifted in his seat. "I scanned in properly at the gate," Amara said. Her tone remained soft, but her voice had gained an edge, one carved from decades of courtroom negotiations and institutional resistance. "There must be an error on your end." Carolyn didn't budge. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Amara paused for a long moment. Then, slowly, she opened her bag and removed the pass. She held it up without offering it. Carolyn took it anyway, even though she had seen it already. She held it up to the cabin light like it might melt. "Dr. Templeton," she said. "Seat 1A. I see. No mention of mileage status or companion upgrade. Was this purchased directly?" The pause after was, "This wasn't long, but it was long enough." Amara smiled tightly. "Yes, with cash, with money. Yes." Carolyn held her gaze. So did Amara, for 5 full seconds. Then Carolyn handed back the pass and nodded as if she just decided to tolerate her. "Thank you for your cooperation," she said, and turned to leave. Amara folded the pass and slid it slowly back into her bag. Leo, from the galley curtain, had seen the whole thing. He didn't move. Not yet. Back in 2C, Graham tapped something into his phone. A private, encrypted upload. No post. No caption. Just storage. Just in case. When Leo walked past her seat 10 minutes later, Amara caught his sleeve gently. He turned, startled. "I have a question," she said, quietly. "Is my name listed on the manifest?" Leo hesitated. "I'm not sure I can. I need to know," she said, looking up at him. His mouth opened, then closed. He swallowed. "I'll check," he said. He returned to the galley and opened the flight tablet. The manifest appeared, line by line, seat 1A blank. He blinked, refreshed. Still blank. Gate scan logs, nothing for 1A. But he remembered seeing her board, remembered scanning her ticket, remembered Carolyn sending him away before she looked at it again. He tapped into the admin activity log. An override had been entered. Passenger data deleted from seat 1A, no name, no reason. Just a code, ZFX19. He stared at the code for a long time. He'd never seen one like it. His fingers hovered over the intercom, then stopped. He backed out of the screen, returned the tablet, and took 3 deep breaths. In the cabin. Amara closed her eyes again. She wasn't sleeping. She was remembering. A different flight. 10 years earlier. Domestic. Small aircraft. Coach cabin. A flight attendant had asked her to change seats to balance the load. They'd said, even though she had been assigned the window seat, they wanted her to move. Without explanation, she had done it. Quietly. Without a word. She had never forgotten how it made her feel. Not angry, not ashamed, but invisible. Tonight, she was done being invisible. Carolyn passed by again. She bumped the side of Amara's seat with her hip. No apology. Amara opened her eyes, looked forward. Steady. Leo returned. I checked, he said under his breath. Someone removed you from the system. Amara's eyebrows lifted slightly. Thank you, she said. Then she reached for her phone. This time, she unlocked the secure app. A hidden OS launched beneath the interface. No logos, no sound. She typed 3 words, Level 3 active, then hit send. Far above the fuselage, beyond the reach of corporate filters, a satellite pinged once, then again, then a system not owned by Sky Vista Airlines, not even known to most of its board, began to record. Not just cameras, everything, speech, movement, chain of command. For now, Amara said nothing more. Across the aisle, Graham Tiller was watching closely. He had seen this kind of power before. Not loud, not flashy, but surgical. He leaned forward slightly. The story was just beginning. The cabin lights dimmed. Flight SVH-15 had reached its initial cruising altitude, but the air inside first class felt far from settled. The usual clinking of glasses and rustling of menus was subdued, not gone, just restrained, like the tension in the room had placed everyone on edge, and no one could quite name why. Amara Templeton sat perfectly still in seat 1A, her face calm, her breath steady, but her mind, it was moving faster than the aircraft itself. She had triggered Level 3 oversight. That wasn't a decision she took lightly. It meant every system connected to the plane's data core was now being monitored by an independent ethics protocol she helped design years ago. It meant she had initiated a chain of observation without needing anyone's permission, because she still had residual authority buried in the airline's contract framework. A clause no one thought she'd use. Most of them had forgotten it even existed, except Ronald Kessler. And she was fairly certain he would feel the ripple very soon. But tonight wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about her. It was about the culture that had allowed Carolyn Drake to behave this way. Not just once, not just on this flight, but over decades. Amara looked down at her hands resting in her lap. They weren't shaking, but they carried memory. Memory of boardrooms where she was talked over. Reports she'd authored that were dismissed until repeated by someone else. 1,000 tiny cuts that were never counted because no one wanted to admit the bleeding. She exhaled, slow and controlled. Carolyn had not returned in the last 10 minutes, but Amara could feel her energy from behind the curtain, hovering, watching, preparing, across the aisle. Graham Tiller closed his notebook and leaned back. He pressed the button for assistance, not because he needed anything, but because he wanted to see who would respond. Leo appeared, his expression neutral. "Yeah, sir," he asked softly. Graham looked at him for a moment. "What's your name?" he asked. "Leo. Martinez." "Thanks." "Leo," Graham said. "Could I get another glass of seltzer?" "Please." Leo nodded and turned toward the galley. "But before he left," Graham added, "you've seen what's happening, haven't you?" Leo froze for just half a second. Then he turned his head slowly. His voice, when he spoke, was barely a whisper. "I have," he said, "but I don't know what to do." Graham studied him carefully. "Start by not pretending you didn't." Leo didn't reply. He simply nodded once and disappeared. 2 rows behind them, an elderly black woman in 3F leaned toward her husband. She hadn't said much since boarding. She didn't need to. Her eyes had been watching everything. "She's being tested," she whispered. Her husband, bald, glasses perched low on his nose, nodded. "But she's not flinching," he replied, "and neither of them did. In the galley." Leo placed a glass of seltzer on a tray and paused. He could hear Carolyn on a call behind the crew curtain, speaking softly into her personal headset. No confirmation yet. "Yes, she's still in 1A. I've already started the process." No one's intervened." Leo's stomach tightened. He took the drink and walked carefully back to the cabin. As he passed Amara's row, he glanced at her not directly, but just enough to let her know, "I hear it too." Amara gave him the barest nod. "Thank you. I see you." He delivered the drink to Graham, then returned to his jump seat at the rear of first class. He was shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, from that horrible feeling in your gut when you know you're being asked to stand by while something wrong unfolds right in front of you. He thought of his training just weeks ago. The phrase kept echoing. Maintain order, protect the experience, de-escalate at all costs. But nowhere in that manual had they mentioned what to do when the threat wasn't a passenger, but a senior crew member. Carolyn emerged again. Her expression was neutral, too neutral. She approached Amar without a tray, without a purpose, just presence. "Dr. Templeton," she said, her voice even but brittle at the edges. "I've just spoken with gate control. Unfortunately, your boarding record still isn't showing up in our system. This poses a liability concern for everyone's safety. I'm going to ask that you relocate to a seat in premium economy until we can verify your credentials." The cabin went still. Amara didn't move. She simply looked up at Carolyn, her eyes calm, unwavering. "I'm not moving," she said. Carolyn's lips parted, as if she expected a longer response. "I'm sorry, but that's not a request," Carolyn said. "I understand," Amara replied, "but it's still not happening." A pause. Then Amara reached into her bag and retrieved her phone. She tapped once, then held it to her ear. "Captain Mercer, please," she said, her tone crisp. "This is a passenger matter requiring command-level clarification." Carolyn stiffened. "You're not allowed to." Amara held up a hand. Not rudely, but with finality. "Let me finish." The line connected. "This is Templeton. Protocol is now active. Passenger removal request denied. Manifest override confirmed. Requesting cabin status acknowledgement." She ended the call. Carolyn stood frozen. Graham leaned forward in his seat. Leo stood up. Behind them, the woman in 3F smiled faintly. And Amara Templeton folded her hands once more in her lap. Not angry, not triumphant, just certain. She wasn't going anywhere. Captain Dana Mercer was halfway through reviewing turbulence reports from the Atlantic corridor when her headset buzzed. The voice on the other end was crisp. "Captain, this is Amara Templeton in Seat 1A. Level 3. Oversight has been activated. Passenger manifest override has been confirmed. A cabin crew member is attempting to relocate me under false system data." Captain Mercer froze. That name Templeton, it struck a memory like a quiet bell. Dana wasn't new to flying. She'd logged over 12,000 flight hours across domestic and international routes. But long before she wore 4 stripes on her shoulder, she remembered reading a confidential internal white paper titled Ethics in Altitude. One of the contributors, co-architects even, was a Dr. Amara Templeton, a woman who had once sat on the airline's oversight board, a woman whose resignation from that board had been so quiet it raised louder questions. Dana sat up straighter in her seat and tapped the cockpit console. "Confirm passenger ID," she asked. "Confirmed. Boarding pass matches Dr. Amara Templeton, Seat 1A, and she's been flagged. Yes, by override code ZFX19. Dana's eyebrows pulled together. That code wasn't common. It was buried deep in administrative protocols reserved only for executive manipulation. It wasn't generated by the flight system. It was entered manually. Someone, somewhere, had tried to erase Amara Templeton mid-flight, and they almost got away with it. She picked up her intercom and spoke clearly. "Cabin crew, this is the flight deck. Senior officer, please report to the cockpit. In the cabin." Carolyn Drake heard the call and hesitated. She glanced toward Amara, who remained in seat 1A, unbothered, phone now resting on her tray again. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't even smiling. She was just still. That's what made Carolyn nervous. She straightened her jacket, tucked her tablet under one arm, and moved briskly toward the front of the plane. As the curtain closed behind her, Graham Tiller reached into his bag and retrieved a slim black folio. Inside was a stack of pre-formatted legal documents, witness statements, affidavit templates, privacy rights notifications. He had started carrying them on flights 2 years ago, because too many times he had seen things happen in the air that people wanted to forget by the time the wheels touched down. He wasn't going to forget this. Behind the curtain, Carolyn entered the cockpit. Captain Mercer turned slowly in her seat. "I've received a call from seat 1A, she said. "Yes," Carolyn replied coolly. "There's been some confusion with her manifest status. Her name wasn't listed." Dana lifted an eyebrow. "Who authorized override ZFX119? Carolyn paused. "Just briefly. It may have been a gate error. That code isn't generated from the gate. It's entered at the supervisor level." Dana replied, "You're listed as senior cabin authority. Did you input that override?" "I followed standard verification protocol," Carolyn said. The passenger refused to move when asked. Dana narrowed her eyes. And why was she asked to move? Carolyn hesitated, then carefully said, "She didn't appear to have proper credentials for that seat." There it was. Dana leaned back slightly. "Her boarding pass matches. Her identity is confirmed. She's a former board member of our own ethics division." Carolyn didn't flinch. "I wasn't aware. Then perhaps you should have asked before attempting to forcibly relocate her." Silence settled between them. Dana continued, "From this moment, I'm issuing a temporary suspension of manifest control from your device. All passenger data will be locked and transmitted to HQ under encryption. Return to cabin and resume duties. Do not engage passenger in 1A unless instructed by command." Carolyn's face remained flat. "Understood." She turned and exited. Back in the cabin, Leo Martinez had taken a seat near the galley. His leg bounced anxiously under the crew jump seat. He had been listening in on the open comm line. Not every word, but enough. He exhaled slowly. He had never seen Carolyn called into the cockpit before. When she returned, something about her had shifted. She walked straight past Amara without looking. No apology, no comment, no instructions, just silence. It was the loudest moment of the flight so far. Amara leaned back in her seat, not out of arrogance, but from exhaustion, a kind that lived in the bones. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't even relieved. She was simply aware that a storm had been slowed, not stopped. Across the aisle, Graham reached into his folio and removed a small note card. He scribbled something quickly and passed it discreetly to Amara's tray table as he stood to stretch. She opened it. It read, "I've been watching, and I'm recording. If you need backup, I'm 2 seats away. G.T." Amara glanced up at him as he walked toward the restroom. She gave a single, warm nod of acknowledgement. Back in seat 3F, The older woman watched it all unfold and whispered to her husband. "That woman," she said softly. "She carries herself like she's already answered the question." "What question?" he asked. "Whether or not she belongs." He smiled gently. "She answered that before she boarded at the back of first class." Leo finally stood and stepped into the forward galley. He tapped a screen. The system had already updated. Passenger 1A Templeton, Amara, status confirmed, protocol level 3 active. He stared at the words for a long time. Then he opened the crew message log. There was a space for comments, for anonymous crew concerns. He hesitated, then typed, "Observe supervisor override on passenger manifest with no justification. Passenger 1A was verified and mistreated. This requires review." He didn't sign his name. He didn't need to. Some things, once said, could not be unsaid. Back in seat 1A. Amara took a sip of her water and looked ahead. She had not raised her voice. She had not stood. And yet the entire structure of the flight had shifted around her. Because sometimes presence speaks louder than protest. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay seated when someone insists you do not belong. An hour into the flight, the cabin had returned to a stillness that felt unnatural, not peaceful, but tight, like the silence after a slammed door. First class was bathed in soft lighting. Most passengers either closed their eyes or immersed themselves in screens and books. But beneath the surface, a quiet awareness buzzed in the air. Everyone had seen the confrontation, and no one had forgotten it. Amara Templeton sat calmly in seat 1A, her hands folded over the tablet resting in her lap. She had not moved. Her posture hadn't shifted. She could feel every vibration of the plane through the soles of her shoes. Even now, she sensed it. Retaliation didn't always come fast. It waited. It chose its moment. Especially when the one delivering it wore a pressed uniform and a practiced smile. She heard the soft rustle of a tray cart. Carolyn was returning. There was something precise about the way she moved now, as though her spine had stiffened with a new decision. She stopped by Amara's seat, smiling faintly. "Dinner service. Dr. Templeton," she said with practiced politeness. "Would you care for red wine with your meal?" Amara looked up. Her face revealed nothing. "Water's fine," she said quietly. "Of course," Carolyn replied. She reached for a small glass bottle from the cart, unscrewed the cap, and poured it slowly into a crystal glass. Too slowly. Amara noticed the angle of her wrist, the tension in her fingers, the tilt of her elbow. Just as Carolyn leaned forward to place the glass onto the tray, her hand slipped. Water spilled directly onto Amara's lap. A full pour, not a drop to the side. The entire front of her navy trousers soaked in seconds. "Oh dear," Carolyn said loudly. "I'm so sorry. That was completely accidental." Her voice was clear enough for everyone in first class to hear. Amara stared down at her lap. The water had already soaked through the fabric. It wasn't scalding. It wasn't harmful. Just cold. Intentional. Violating in the most mundane, deniable way. "I'll get towels," Carolyn added, turning sharply without waiting for a response. Leo Martinez watched it from 2 rows back. He had just finished securing a tray in the galley and caught the entire scene. He froze. The look on Carolyn's face, just before the spill, hadn't been surprise. It had been precision. He moved fast, brushing past her as she reached for a stack of napkins. "I've got it," he said, grabbing a clean towel and heading straight for Amara's seat. Carolyn stood back and let him go. Leo knelt slightly beside her seat, voice low. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "That wasn't an accident." "I know," Amara said softly, accepting the towel. She pressed it lightly against her lap. Not scrubbing, just dabbing. Her composure never cracked. Leo stood beside her, unsure whether to walk away. "She's pushing you," he said, trying to provoke something. "She wants a scene," Amara said. "Are you going to report it?" Amara folded the damp towel neatly and placed it on the edge of her tray. "I already have," she said. Leo looked confused. Amara gave a small, tired smile. "Level 3. Oversight doesn't just monitor system data," she said. "It captures audio, video, spatial telemetry." Leo blinked. "You mean the spill was logged the moment her hand moved," Amara said. Leo glanced nervously toward the galley, where Carolyn stood pretending to arrange drink cups. "You don't seem angry," he said. Amara turned slightly to look at him. "I'm beyond anger," she said. "I've lived through too many small humiliations to waste energy on rage." Leo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So why not fight back harder? Demand she's removed. Ask the captain to intervene. You have that power." Amara nodded slowly. "I could," she said, "but this story isn't just about me. It's about the system that trained her to believe she could do this without consequence. If I make it personal, it becomes about pride. But if I stay quiet, it becomes undeniable." Leo understood now. Not just what she was doing, but how. She wasn't trying to win the moment. She was trying to expose it. "I admire you," he said. Amara's eyes softened. "I admire you too," she replied. "Most people look away." He didn't know what to say after that, so he gave a respectful nod and stepped back toward the galley. Across the aisle, Graham Tiller had seen it all. The spill, the tension, the composure. He reached into his bag and pulled out his tablet. He began drafting a message to a colleague back in New York. Subject, witness statement, in-flight discrimination. Body, I'm currently on Sky Vista Flight SV-815. First-class passenger, Dr. Amara Templeton has been subjected to targeted harassment by senior flight attendant Carolyn Drake. 2 visible incidents so far. I believe she's triggering corporate-level protocol, gathering data for possible affidavit. Will advise further upon landing. He saved the draft. He'd send it later, once they were on the ground. But the paper trail had begun. In the cockpit, Captain Dana Mercer received a ping. The AI subsystem managing Level 3 had flagged an interaction. Passenger 1A physical contact event. Liquid spill. Timing consistent with proximity-based retaliation. She frowned. She had hoped Carolyn would back off. Now, she knew that wouldn't happen. She opened her comm channel. "HQ, this is Flight SV-815. Requesting in-flight ethics liaison for post-landing protocol. Possible protocol breach confirmed. Response acknowledged. Reviewing telemetry. Continue operations. Maintain observation." Dana leaned back and exhaled. She had flown through lightning storms quieter than this flight, in seat 1A. Amara reached for her sweater, which had been folded across her lap earlier. She laid it gently over the wet fabric, covering the worst of the damage. Her hands, still, were steady. She wasn't broken, but something inside her heart curled slightly at the edges. Not from the water, not from Carolyn, but from knowing that this would not be the last time someone tried to erase her with a smile. And still, she chose to stay seated, because the truth needed to land, not crash. Amara shifted slightly in her seat, adjusting the sweater over her damp trousers. The fabric was beginning to dry now, but the feeling it left behind had nothing to do with water. She had felt it before, not the physical discomfort, but the sensation of being marked. singled out in ways so quiet they were meant to be dismissed. Carolyn's actions were not a mistake. They were a message. You're not untouchable. Not even here. Not even now. Amara looked out the window. Darkness stretched endlessly outside, punctuated by distant stars. Below them, the Atlantic Ocean churned invisibly, unaware of the quiet battles happening 35,000 feet above. She pressed her fingers gently against the armrest. Her body was still, but her mind was adrift. She wasn't thinking of the present. She was thinking of Tulsa. 23 years ago, she had been a newly minted PhD, young, hopeful, interviewing for a faculty position at a private university in Oklahoma, one of the few black women in her field at the time. The search committee was cordial, professional. The tour was smooth, the questions thoughtful, even kind. And yet, just before her final lecture presentation, a faculty member pulled her aside. "I just want to be sure," he said, eyes narrowing in a way that made her stomach turn. "You understand our students may not be used to someone like you leading the conversation?" She had blinked. "Someone like me." He smiled, like he'd said nothing unusual. And then he said the words that never left her. "You don't seem angry. I respect that." Amara had walked into the lecture hall anyway, delivered her presentation with clarity and grace. They offered her the job 2 days later. She declined it the next morning, because silence is not the same as consent, and grace is not a gift owed to the unkind. She looked away from the window now. The cabin lights had dimmed further, preparing for the overnight segment of the flight. Carolyn had retreated behind the curtain, not seen for nearly 40 minutes. Leo continued to move quietly through the aisle, checking on passengers, avoiding confrontation. Every so often, his eyes met Amara's. Each time, there was a question in them. "Are you okay?" And every time, her subtle nod answered, "I'm still here, in seat 2C. Graham Tiller was deep in thought. He had spent the last half hour reviewing Sky Vista's ethics charter on his tablet. He knew the language well. He had helped draft something similar for a different airline client a year ago. What struck him now was the clause labeled Human Dignity Protocol. It was elegant, vague enough for interpretation, strong enough for accountability. It had been proposed by a former executive whose name appeared only once in the fine print. Templeton. He closed the file and looked over at her. She hadn't flinched once this entire flight. Not when they erased her name. Not when they tried to remove her. Not when they humiliated her with that spill. Graham exhaled, then stood and walked over. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the open seat beside her. Amara looked at him for a moment, then gave a gentle nod. Graham sat down and leaned slightly forward. "I know we haven't been properly introduced," he said. "I'm Graham. Civil rights law. New York." Amara tilted her head, amused. "You carry yourself like someone used to courtrooms," she said. Graham smiled. "And you carry yourself like someone who no longer needs one." They sat in silence for a moment. Then he added, "I want to apologize." For what Amara asked. For not saying something sooner. For watching it happen and hesitating. Amara looked at him, her expression softening. "There's no shame in being quiet," she said. "The shame is in pretending it didn't happen." He nodded slowly. "Well," he said, "I'm not pretending anymore." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I've drafted a witness statement. I'll send it to a few people when we land, including my editor at the Ledger." Amara raised an eyebrow. "Planning to go public if it's what you want," he said. "But I won't move forward without your consent." Amara smiled. Consent. she said quietly. Such a simple concept, yet so often ignored. He placed the envelope on her tray table. Think about it, he said. Standing. I'm in 2C. She watched him return to his seat. Across the cabin. Leo stood frozen near the galley curtain. He had overheard everything. Not intentionally, but it had landed like a stone in his chest. He moved toward Amara's seat. I have something for you, he said quietly, placing a warm blanket over her shoulders. It's from the business class drawer. Not regulation for first, but I thought you might appreciate it. She looked up at him. Thank you, she said. He hesitated, then said, My father used to talk about people like you. Amara tilted her head. Like me. People who stay steady when others try to break them. Leo said. He called it being forged in fire. Amara chuckled softly. Your father sounds wise. He passed last year, Leo said. But I think he'd be proud to know I met someone who reminded me of him. She didn't say anything at first. Then she placed a hand gently over his. Thank you, Leo. He stepped away after that, but his footsteps were lighter. The atmosphere in first class had shifted, no longer held hostage by Carolyn's presence. It began to breathe again. In the cockpit, Captain Dana Mercer scanned the latest flag from the Level 3 feed. No new violations. Cabin status stabilizing. She allowed herself a small sigh of relief, but she also knew the flight wasn't over, and some storms do not appear on radar. Amara closed her eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to gather herself. Outside her window, the stars kept moving, and so did she. The cabin lights were dim now, casting a soft golden hue across the rows of first-class seats. Most passengers had settled in for the long flight across the Atlantic. Blanket draped, eyes closed, headphones on. It was the quietest the cabin had been since they left Chicago. But in the front galley, a notification tone broke the stillness. Carolyn Drake looked down at the small flight tablet mounted beside the beverage inventory panel. A red light blinked. Then, a message appeared. Priority notice. Live status check from Sky. HQ Ethics Command, Flight SV-815. She froze. This wasn't routine. She tapped the screen, trying to dismiss it, but the message remained. Live cabin behavior feed currently active. Immediate crew compliance required. Command requests video feed confirmation of cabin operations. Her throat tightened. She turned to Leo, who had just finished locking the liquor drawer. Did you see this? She asked, voice low. Leo nodded. They're watching, he said simply. Carolyn narrowed her eyes. Why Leo didn't answer? He didn't have to. She already knew. The Level 3 protocol had triggered corporate observation, and now HQ was watching. Carolyn turned away, mask of control flickering for a second. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She'd been with the airline for over 18 years. She'd handled disruptive passengers, smoothed out first-class egos, and dealt with complications more than 100 times. But this wasn't like the others. This passenger didn't yell. She didn't resist. She didn't even raise her voice. And yet the entire aircraft was now under scrutiny because of her. Back in seat 1A, Amara Templeton stared straight ahead. She hadn't touched the envelope Graham had given her. She hadn't needed to, because now, finally, someone else was paying attention. The system was awake. Across the aisle, Graham stirred. He noticed the flicker of activity in the galley, the subtle shift in Leo's body language. He leaned forward just enough to catch Amara's eye. They're watching now, he said quietly. I know, Amara replied. You think they'll intervene mid-flight? She gave a small, thoughtful pause. "No," she said, "but they'll remember everything when we land." That, more than anything, was what she had wanted. Not revenge, just accountability. She looked to the window. The stars outside hadn't moved, but she felt closer to them somehow. She hadn't done much tonight, at least not visibly. No arguments, no lawsuits, no shouting. But still, something was shifting. It was in the air now. Tension beginning to lose its grip. Near the curtain, Leo's screen blinked again. New instruction. Senior attendant to report acknowledgement of Level 3 protocol awareness. Response timestamp required. Leo looked over at Carolyn. "They want you to acknowledge the oversight," he said. Carolyn exhaled sharply through her nose. "They don't give orders mid-flight. This is ridiculous. Leo didn't move. They just did." She tapped the screen with visible reluctance. Response logged. Time 02:12. UTC for a moment. Silence settled again. Then a final message popped up. Notice incident 1AC confirmed. Final review pending. Post-landing interview required. Carolyn stared at the screen. She wasn't used to being the one questioned. She had built her career around appearing polished, capable, in control. And now the system had placed her under a microscope, and it all started with that woman in 1A. She peeked through the curtain. Amara wasn't looking at her. She wasn't doing anything at all. She was just present. And that was enough to unseat everything. Carolyn turned sharply and disappeared down the service corridor. Leo watched her go. He waited until she was out of sight, then returned to the cabin. He approached Amara's seat. "HQ just flagged everything," he whispered. "They're recording. Every move from now until landing." Amara nodded slowly. "Thank you." He hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. "Of course. Why didn't you ever stand up for yourself? You know, the way people expect you to make a scene. Fight back louder." Amara looked at him. Her voice was calm, steady. "Because that's the reaction they want," she said. "So they can justify everything they already believe about people like me." Leo sat across the aisle for a moment, absorbing her words. "People like you," he asked. "Black women who know their worth." She replied, "We scare them more when we don't raise our voice." Leo leaned back in his seat, quiet now. He wasn't sure he fully understood, but he knew he believed her. From the cockpit, Captain Dana Mercer had been watching the same feed. Her headset buzzed again with a direct line from Sky Vista Ethics. "Captain Mercer, we're confirming Level 3 activity. You are cleared for cabin continuity. No deviation from schedule, but full debrief will be conducted on arrival." "Understood," she replied. Her co-pilot gave her a look. "Is it about 1?" Dana nodded slowly. "She's not just a passenger. She's the reason the protocol exists in the first place." The co-pilot raised his eyebrows. "She wrote the system." "She helped build it," Dana said. "And tonight, she just reminded everyone how powerful it really is." Back in the cabin, Carolyn returned. Her walk was different now, less confident, less sharp, as if some invisible weight had landed on her shoulders. She didn't make eye contact with anyone, not Leo, not Graham, not Amara. She passed 1A without stopping. Amara didn't move, didn't gloat, didn't even blink. She simply watched, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with deep, grounded presence. A presence that could not be erased, even when the system tried, even when people smiled while doing it. She was still here, and that, finally, was being seen. The flight had entered its final hour. Outside the cabin windows, the stars began to dim as the horizon over Europe slowly brightened with the first signs of dawn. A soft orange glow pressed against the darkness, and for the first time since takeoff, the world below seemed visible again. In the cockpit, Captain Dana Mercer made a quiet note to initiate descent procedures in 20 minutes. She reviewed airspace clearance, weather reports over Barcelona, and one final item from the Ethics Command feed. Update Passenger 1A logged with full protocol verification. Cabin crew under review. Observation to continue through disembarkation. She closed the message and looked ahead through the windshield. Landing would be smooth, but the aftermath would not. In the main cabin, Amara Templeton unfolded her sweater from her lap and gently placed it back in her carry-on. Her trousers had dried. The stain remained faint but visible, a watermark of a moment meant to humiliate her. She wasn't humiliated. She was ready. Graham Tiller leaned across the aisle again. "They just confirmed we'll be landing in about 35 minutes, he said. Amara nodded. "Thank you." He hesitated. "There's something about you," he added. Amara gave a faint smile. "Something good. I hope." Graham chuckled softly. "Something undeniable." In seat 3D, a middle-aged woman with short silver hair turned to her husband. She had remained quiet during most of the flight, but the events had left her uneasy. "Did you hear what that flight attendant said earlier?" She whispered. "The one who poured the water." "No," she said. "Before that. When she told the woman in 1A her name wasn't on the list. I heard it. She said, 'That seat's for first-class travelers.'" Her husband looked toward the front of the cabin. "What's wrong with that?" The woman sighed. She didn't mean it like it sounds. She meant it like it stings. Her husband paused, then slowly nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I felt it too. In the galley." Leo adjusted the coffee service, hands moving carefully, almost reverently. He had been flying for 5 years, enough time to see the best and worst of people in a pressurized tube above the clouds. But this was different. This wasn't just a mishandled customer or a rude exchange. This was a calculated effort to erase someone, and that someone refused to be erased. He took a deep breath and looked toward Carolyn, who stood near the curtain again, arms crossed, eyes locked on the floor. She hadn't spoken in almost an hour. Not to Leo, not to the other flight attendants, not to the passengers. Her authority had shrunk with every passing minute, and she felt it in her spine. A buzz vibrated from her tablet again. HQ request statement. Submission pending. Full report required within 12 hours of landing. She tapped it away. It buzzed again. Delay in response noted. Supervisor review initiated. Her hand tightened around the device. She looked through the curtain toward Amara, who remained still, composed, unshaken. It burned, because no matter what Carolyn had done false override, public questioning, the water Amara had not broken. She had not raised her voice. She had not escalated. And still, she had won the room. Back in 1A, Amara took out a small notepad and began writing. Just a few lines, a habit from years ago. When you are made invisible, write yourself into the world again. She wrote quietly. A woman in seat 1A. Name erased, seat denied, voice unheard. And yet, here she sits, witnessed, whole. She looked at the words and closed the notebook. It was enough. As the captain announced descent, cabin lights flickered softly, passengers stirred, seat backs lifted, belts clicked into place, the usual ritual resumed. But it felt different this time. There was a quiet electricity in the air, a shared recognition that something important had unfolded mid-air, and not everyone was ready to forget it once the wheels touched ground. Graham leaned toward her one last time. "Do you want me to walk off with you?" he asked. Amara smiled gently. "No, but thank you." He respected that. She didn't need protection. She just needed the truth to follow her to the ground. Leo passed down the aisle offering final checks. Tray tables up, seat backs forward. "Thank you for flying with Sky Vista." When he reached 1A, he paused. "Miss Templeton," he said, voice low, "it's been an honor to serve you." She met his eyes. "And you did," she said. He moved on, in the jump seat. Carolyn buckled herself in. Her hands trembled slightly. She had never been reviewed before, never logged for ethics protocol, and certainly never expected one passenger to shift the weight of an entire flight. As the wheels touched down in Barcelona, the cabin applauded softly. Not for the landing, but for closure. Sort of. Because some stories do not end when the flight ends. They begin again in the terminal, in the media, in the boardroom, in whispered conversations and open reckonings. Amara waited until the plane came to a full stop. Then she stood, gathered her bag, and stepped into the aisle. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. What came next would arrive with or without her attention. She had done her part. One calm refusal. One undeniable presence. One moment that turned a flight into a movement. And behind her, 32 passengers would remember. So would the crew. So would Carolyn. And so would the airline. The cabin door hissed as it opened. Morning light streamed through the entryway, flooding the aircraft with a soft warmth that felt both real and symbolic. After 9 hours in the air, Flight SV-815 was officially grounded at Barcelona International. Yet the real grounding had already begun within people, within reputations, within a system that had been asleep too long. Carolyn Drake remained in the forward galley, holding the interphone handset as passengers stood, stretched, and reached for their bags. "Thank you for flying with Sky Vista," she said into the mic. "We hope you enjoyed your flight and wish you a pleasant stay in Barcelona." Her voice was steady, but her stomach was not. Because as she spoke, 2 people had entered the jet bridge quietly and were waiting just outside the door. They wore plain navy blue suits with small Sky Vista Ethics Division badges clipped to their belts. No announcement, no commotion, just presence. Leo spotted them first. He swallowed hard and turned to glance at Carolyn. She hadn't seen them yet, but Amara had. As she stepped into the front of the cabin, her carry-on over her shoulder, her eyes met the taller of the 2 ethics officers. He gave a small nod. No words were exchanged. She didn't need to be told what was happening. She had written the very process unfolding before her. Passengers began to file out slowly. A few glanced at Amara as they passed, giving soft nods or quiet smiles. No one said much, but their faces spoke volumes. Graham Tiller approached last from first class. "Want me to wait for you outside?" he asked. "No," Amara replied. "Go ahead. I'll be just a minute longer." He nodded, adjusted his blazer, and gave one last glance toward Carolyn. Then he disappeared into the jet bridge. Amara stepped forward. Carolyn finally turned and saw them, the ethics division. Her mouth went dry. The taller officer stepped in with measured calm. "Ms. Drake, I'm Agent Lucas with Sky Vista Ethics. My colleague is Agent Roy. We'll be conducting a standard protocol debrief with you this morning regarding the events of Flight SV-815. Carolyn blinked. "I wasn't aware this would happen on site. Review procedures were initiated in real time," Lucas replied. "This is a high-priority case." Leo, standing nearby, kept his eyes low. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Carolyn nodded stiffly and stepped out of the galley, her voice quieter now. "I'd like to contact my union representative before giving any statements." "You're entitled to do so," Agent Roy said. "Please step with us to the conference area." She glanced toward Amara one last time. There was no hate in her eyes now, only something resembling regret, or fear, or both. She followed the officers into the terminal. Amara stood at the doorway, watching her go. Then she stepped off the aircraft. Her feet touched the terminal floor, and for the first time in hours, she felt a shift not in gravity, but in atmosphere. Her presence was no longer being questioned. It was being acknowledged. Leo met her just outside the gate. "Thank you," he said quietly. Amara gave him a soft smile. "For what?" "For making people see." She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You were already looking," she said. "That's what matters." He nodded. Then she walked into the terminal. The airport buzzed with the sound of rolling suitcases, multilingual announcements, and the low hum of morning travelers. But beneath it all, Amara moved with purpose. She didn't check her phone. She didn't look around. She simply walked toward customs. And as she walked, a low voice called from behind, "Dr. Templeton." She turned. A Sky Vista terminal supervisor approached, holding a sleek black folder. "I've been asked to extend a formal apology on behalf of the airline," he said. "We're aware of the protocol breach and have begun an internal investigation." Amara raised her eyebrows slightly. "You're not with ethics." "No, ma'am," he said. "I was requested by HQ to meet you personally. Your profile flagged executive status on multiple international boards." "I'm not here in any executive capacity," Amara replied. "We understand, but the company has issued a written statement to acknowledge the mishandling of your experience. Would you like to receive it now or have it sent digitally?" She hesitated, then reached for the folder. "I'll read it later." She said, "Thank you." The supervisor nodded and stepped away. She held the folder loosely in one hand. It was not justice. Not yet. But it was a beginning. As she moved through customs, the line seemed to part just slightly for her. Not because of fear, but because of something more subtle. Respect. She passed through the last checkpoint and entered the arrivals hall. There stood Graham Tiller, waiting by a nearby column, phone in hand. "I figured you might need a ride," he said. Amara chuckled. "I have one waiting," she said. "Of course you do." He smiled. "Still offer stands. I'll take your card instead." He handed it to her. Clean design. Just his name, number, and a quiet logo. She tucked it into her jacket. "Thank you. Graham. Anytime." Amara. She turned and stepped into the flow of the crowd. Outside, the sky was a soft blue, Barcelona waking up, and somewhere in the city, a hotel room waited. So did emails, meetings, repercussions. But for now, Amara allowed herself one moment of peace, not because the fight was over, but because, for the first time in a long time, it had been heard. The Sky Vista Global Headquarters towered over downtown Atlanta, its steel and glass exterior catching the morning light like a blade. Inside, the 31st floor conference room was already full, the air too still for comfort. 12 executives sat around a walnut table, eyes scanning digital documents on embedded tablets. A screen at the end of the room displayed 3 words in bold gray font: Flight SV-815 Review. At the head of the table sat Jocelyn Carr, Senior Vice President of Operations, mid-40s, sharp eyes, press suit. She didn't speak often in meetings, but when she did, no one interrupted. Today, her expression was unreadable. Begin, she said. Malik Dorian, Director of Passenger Experience, cleared his throat. As of 0900 this morning, we've completed the initial assessment of Flight SV-815 based on Ethics Division reports, passenger testimonies, and in-flight footage, and the summary Jocelyn asked. Malik's fingers trembled slightly as he tapped the screen. Senior Flight Attendant Carolyn Drake initiated a name override for Passenger 1A without proper cause. She then publicly challenged the passenger's seat status, denied service for over 4 hours, and deliberately spilled a beverage on her. The entire incident was recorded. Several people in the room shifted uncomfortably, and the passenger Jocelyn asked, eyes still on the screen. Malik hesitated. Dr. Amara Templeton. Now. Even the quietest people in the room looked up. A few exchanged glances. Jocelyn raised an eyebrow. Yes. Malik confirmed. The Amara Templeton, former board ethics consultant, architect of our Level 3 passenger integrity protocol. Jocelyn let that hang in the air. She helped build the very system used to monitor misconduct, she said flatly. Yes, ma'am. So let me understand this correctly. She continued. One of the most respected voices in our ethics history, who holds a doctorate in organizational justice, was publicly humiliated in first class by a veteran attendant on a flight where our protocol should have protected her. Yes. Jocelyn closed her tablet slowly. She didn't use the protocol herself. Did she? No. A cabin crew member triggered it independently. Jocelyn nodded, then stood up. What was the crew's justification for the override? Malik pulled up the audio transcript. The attendant claimed Dr. Templeton did not match the profile for a first-class traveler, and that her name wasn't on the list. One of the other executives muttered under his breath. Jocelyn turned toward the legal counsel at the far end of the table. Liability exposure. The woman responded calmly, moderate to high, especially if it becomes public. Given her history with the company and her visibility in diversity policy circles, we should expect rapid media traction. Any indication she intends to go public? Not yet. Jocelyn walked toward the screen. I want to speak with her. There was a pause. You want to call her? Malik asked. No, Jocelyn said. I want to meet her in person. She's in Barcelona. Book me a flight. Several brows raised. She may not be interested, someone said quietly. Jocelyn turned. I didn't say she would be, but Sky Vista doesn't just send emails when we damage people like that. She paused. We show up. The room fell silent. Oh, then Jocelyn pointed to the screen. I want Drake's full employment record reviewed by 3 p.m. I want a passenger impact assessment completed by tomorrow. And I want legal to prepare both internal and public statements. One if she accepts our outreach, one if she doesn't. Malik nodded. What about the junior attendant? Someone asked. Leo Martinez. Jocelyn considered. Pull his record too. From what I've seen, he did the right thing. I want confirmation. She grabbed her folder, snapped it shut, and turned toward the door. If we stand for dignity, this is the test, she said before leaving, and we are already behind. Meanwhile, in a quiet cafe tucked between 2 art galleries in Barcelona's Example district, Amara sat with a cup of black tea, no sugar, no lemon, just warm and steady, like her. The cafe was half empty. A local violinist played near the entrance. Her phone rested face down beside her, buzzing occasionally. She hadn't checked her inbox yet. She wasn't avoiding it. She was just pausing. Across from her sat an old friend, Lucia Vega, a Spanish human rights lawyer she had met during a global ethics conference 7 years earlier. Lucia had heard the news, and she wasn't shocked. They never expect calm to be powerful, Lucia said. Amara sipped her tea. That's the point. They want the storm so they can say they were just protecting the sky. Lucia leaned back in her chair. Will you go public? Amara watched the steam rise from her cup. I don't know yet, she said. I didn't ask for attention. I asked for a seat. Lucia smiled gently. But now that the world is looking, maybe they'll finally see. Amara didn't reply. She simply looked out the cafe window, at the quiet street filled with people who would never know what happened on that flight. Or maybe they would, because sometimes truth travels faster than planes, and it always lands where it needs to. The private conference suite at the Mandarin Barcelona overlooked the rooftops of the old city. Sunlight cut in sharp through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long beams over the polished table in the center of the room. Jocelyn Carr arrived alone. No assistants, no legal team, no press. She carried only a leather folio and a black coffee she barely touched. She sat down, waited. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door opened. Amara Templeton stepped in. She wore no makeup, a simple charcoal blazer over a soft cream blouse, the kind of attire that didn't announce wealth, but spoke volumes about presence. Jocelyn stood. Dr. Templeton, she said. Amara nodded, walking slowly but deliberately toward the seat across from her. Ms. Carr. They sat. For a moment, silence stretched between them. The kind of silence that only exists between two women who know power intimately, who know what it means to be underestimated, and who know the price of restraint. I appreciate you agreeing to this, Jocelyn said. I almost didn't, Amara replied calmly. Jocelyn folded her hands. I understand. Amara looked out the window. The city bustled below them, drivers honking, tourists wandering, cafes alive with late morning chatter. The world, unaware of the reckoning happening in this quiet room. Jocelyn opened the folio. I'll be direct. What happened on flight SV-815 was unacceptable. It was not just a service failure. It was a moral failure. On behalf of Sky Vista, I take full responsibility. Amara didn't blink. You weren't on that flight. No, Jocelyn said. But I represent a system that allowed it to happen, and a culture that didn't stop it. Amara leaned forward slightly. What do you want from me, Jocelyn? The question hung heavy. Jocelyn paused before answering. I want to make this right, not just for you, but for everyone like you. Everyone who's been told they don't belong in a seat they paid for. Everyone who's been asked to prove they're worthy of respect. Amara's expression didn't change. And what does making it right look like to you? Jocelyn opened a folder and slid it across the table. Inside was a draft document labeled Sky Vista Equity and Access Charter. I want you to co-lead the implementation of this charter, she said. Full control. You define the board structure, you appoint the oversight roles, and you report directly to me, not to the PR department, not to marketing. Amara looked at the folder but didn't open it. You want me to come back? Jocelyn nodded. Yes. Amara sat in silence for a long moment. I didn't leave because I wanted to, she said softly. I left because I was tired of being a shield, of cleaning up after executives who called it a misunderstanding when it was clearly bias, of being the quiet one in the room when I was the only one who saw the storm coming. Jocelyn listened. Amara leaned back in her chair. You want me to fix something that's still broken at the root, and you think giving me a title and a project will do that? It's not just a project, Jocelyn said. It's power. Amara finally opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the language, the scope, the accountability structures. It was impressive, but it wasn't everything. You know what makes people like Carolyn Drake dangerous? Amara asked suddenly. Jocelyn waited. They believe they're protecting something pure, like first class is sacred, like upholding the standard justifies humiliation. But the problem isn't Carolyn. The problem is that no one told her she was wrong until now, and we're telling her now. Amara closed the folder. Then tell the world, she said. Not just me. Jocelyn met her gaze. I will. Another silence. This one's softer. I'm not interested in being the face of redemption, Amara said, but I am interested in impact. And if this charter is real, if you're willing to burn down parts of your culture to rebuild it better, then I'm listening. Jocelyn didn't flinch. Then we'll rebuild. Amara stood. Jocelyn stood too. I'll need 2 things before I say yes, Amara said. Name them. First, Amara said, full transparency. Public reporting, quarterly updates. No internal-only metrics. Done. Second, she said, I want the cabin crew member who triggered the protocol, Leo Martinez, protected. No retaliation. In fact, I want him promoted into ethics training. Jocelyn smiled faintly. He's already on the list. They shook hands, not as strangers, not as enemies, but as women who understood what it took to lead in silence, to speak through systems instead of spotlights. As Amara turned to leave, Jocelyn said one more thing. We can't undo what happened in 1A, but we can make sure 1B through 1000Z never feel it again. Amara paused, then walked out into the light. Not triumphant, not bitter, just ready. Because change does not begin with noise. It begins with a seat, and a name that no longer has to be defended. It started with a single post. No headline, no hashtags, no anger, just an image, a photo taken by a passenger as Dr. Amara Templeton stood in the aisle of Flight SV-815, calm, composed, her sweater still damp from the water incident. The caption read, This woman never raised her voice, but somehow the whole cabin heard her. Within hours, it was reposted by journalists, by CEOs, by students, by mothers flying with their children, by fathers who remembered their daughters being ignored in boardrooms, and by flight attendants who had once been told to look the other way. Sky Vista Airlines issued an official statement the next morning. We failed to uphold the values we claim to represent. On Flight SV-815, one of the most respected ethics leaders in our industry was publicly mistreated due to unjustified internal bias. We are not only sorry, we are taking action. They attached the Equity and Access Charter, signed by the entire board, led by Dr. Amara Templeton. Within the week, Carolyn Drake's resignation was confirmed. Not because she had been publicly shamed, but because she was given a choice: own the harm, or the harm would own her. She chose to step away quietly. Meanwhile, Leo Martinez received his new badge ethics instructor, Crew Education Division. He taught his first class with a dry mouth and shaking hands, but by the end of the day, 35 trainees applauded him, not because he had all the answers, but because he had once refused to ignore the question. Graham Tiller wrote an op-ed for The Atlantic. It was titled, She Didn't Shout. So they tried not to hear her. It became required reading at several law schools in Barcelona. Amara stood before an audience of 600 at the International Aviation and Ethics Summit. Her talk was simple, no slides, no applause lines, just presence. I didn't ask for a movement, she said, voice steady, but a seat. I didn't ask to be visible. I asked to not be erased. A long pause followed. I am not extraordinary. That's the lie people tell to dismiss what should be ordinary. respect, fairness, the right to board without being judged by your name, your skin, or your silence. That quote appeared on subway posters across New York by the end of the month, and in Atlanta. Jocelyn Carr stood beside Amara as they unveiled Sky Vista's new training center named the Templeton Institute for Dignity in Flight. Its mission: train every employee to see more than uniforms, boarding passes, and seat numbers, to see people. Months passed, then a year. On a quiet afternoon, Amara visited the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, alone. She walked slowly through the exhibits, letting the echoes of history settle over her like soft dust. She stopped at a photo of Rosa Parks, a seat on a bus, a refusal. She looked at it for a long time, not because she saw herself in Rosa, but because she saw something familiar in the stillness of that moment. A decision made not in defiance, but in clarity. She stepped outside into the warm Tennessee air. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Leo. First day of charter program completed. They asked if I knew you personally. I said yes, and that you don't teach with words. You teach with weather. Amara smiled. She didn't reply right away. She just stood there, eyes closed, letting the sun touch her face. This wasn't vindication. This was something deeper. This was what it looked like when silence became policy, when restraint became a storm, when a denied seat became a permanent shift in how the skies saw people like her, the ones told they didn't belong in 1A, the ones made to wait until the system caught up to their worth. She opened her eyes, took a deep breath, and walked on. Somewhere, a flight was boarding, and someone was checking a name. This time, they would check twice, not out of fear, but out of respect, because the skies had changed, and a woman in 1A helped them do it, not by yelling, not by demanding, but by refusing to disappear. She never yelled, she never threatened, she never asked for a spotlight, but her silence echoed across an entire industry. Because on that flight, in seat 1A, Dr. Amara Templeton was told without words that she didn't belong, and she answered not with fury, but with presence. She turned bias into blueprint, humiliation into reform, and a single act of discrimination into a legacy that would teach thousands what respect truly means. Let this story be a reminder that power is not always loud, that dignity does not ask for permission, and that when one woman chooses not to disappear, systems change. We must never stay silent when others are silenced. We must never normalize injustice, no matter how subtle it may appear. And we must always ask the question, who do we become, when we see someone denied their seat? Thank you for listening to Amara's story. If it touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can experience stories that matter. New stories every week, real voices, real justice, and real change. Until next time, stay kind, stay awake, and never stop watching the skies.